This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. Big news tonight from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. Senate Republican leaders have decided to push back their traditional 5-week August vacation in order to try to get something done on health care, nominations, and the budget. And the White House is dealing tonight with yet another revelation in the investigations into Russian interference in the 2016 election and allegations of collusion with the Trump campaign. We're getting a look today at the emails that set up a June 26 meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and a Russian lawyer who was said in the email to have incriminating information about Hillary Clinton and the Russians. The president's son released the emails this morning in what his father called an act of transparency. They were released ahead of a New York Times story that claimed to have the email thread. His father's enemies are sharpening their political pitchforks, using words such as perjury and even treason as they try to prove that Russia tried to sway last fall's election and help the Trump campaign. We are hearing tonight for the first time from Donald Trump Jr. What we know tonight is that Donald Trump Jr.'s email chain has changed the dynamic in the investigations and the coverage of them. Correspondent Kevin Corke has the facts tonight from the North Lawn. Good evening, Kevin.
And good evening to you, Brett. The emails certainly making a bit of a political firestorm here in Washington today. In fact, the unveiling of those emails really brought into much sharper focus the intent of that now infamous meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and a Russian lawyer. But it's also raising new questions tonight about whether or not that itself constitutes collusion.
Things are going a million miles an hour again, and hey, wait a minute, I've heard about all these things, but maybe this is something. I should hear them out. This was, again, just basic information that was going to be possibly there. I didn't know these guys well enough to understand that if this talent manager from Miss Universe, had this kind of thing, so I wanted to hear them out and play it out.
Donald Trump Jr. today released a slew of private emails, an effort he said to be transparent about a meeting with a Russian lawyer last summer, and to likely beat the New York Times, which separately planned to publish them. The emails laying out Trump Jr.'s conversation with a British tabloid publicist, Rob Goldstone, who offered to set up the encounter. This is obviously very high-level and sensitive information, he wrote, but is part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump, adding that it would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. Trump Jr. responded, "If it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer." In his first comments about the controversy, the president today issued a statement, "My son is a high-quality person, and I applaud his transparency." White House officials acknowledge the president is increasingly exasperated by the constant drip of Russia stories.
I think that the president is, I would say, frustrated with the process of the fact that this continues to be an issue, and he would love for us to be focused on things like the economy, on health care, on tax reform, on infrastructure, and that's the place that his mind is, and that's what he'd like to be discussing.
On Capitol Hill, lawmakers suggested the meeting and corroborating emails were far more serious than a mere distraction.
This is obviously very significant, deeply disturbing new public information. All of the campaign denials of whether we know this is going on or whether Russians had any involvement, whether the Russians wanted to help his campaign, obviously now have to be viewed in a completely different context.
This is moving into perjury, false statements, and even into potentially treason.
Natalia Veselnitskaya, the Russian lawyer who, as it turns out, may have used the dirt on Clinton ruse to secure the conversation with the Trump campaign, told NBC News today that Donald Jr. was very interested in anything she might have about the Clinton campaign.
It's quite possible that maybe they were looking for such information. They wanted it so badly.
Have you ever worked for the Russian government? Do you have connections to the Russian government?
No.
Experts say this looks a lot less like collusion than a case of gross political naivete.
While they might be chumps, that doesn't make them criminals. The fact that they had this meeting is not evidence of treason. People need to really think about the implications of what they're suggesting.
Strong words there by Jonathan Turley. By the way, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, who, Brett, you know, is a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, says that committee will now be prioritizing an interview, or at the very least testimony, from Donald Trump Jr. as soon as possible. For his part, Trump Jr. says he'd be happy to pass along what he knows. Brett?
Now, Kevin, I know you've seen all of the pre-taped interview between Donald Trump Jr. and Sean Hannity that'll air tonight at 10 p.m. Is there a sense in that interview that Donald Trump Jr. understood the gravity of what he was being offered here, whether, what exactly he was looking for at the end of that email?
Well, that's a terrific question, and I don't think there's any question that in listening to him very carefully, Brett, you got the sense that this is what happens when you're a political novice. If you have weighty experience in politics, you almost instinctively know immediately not to take that on. Maybe you have a lower-level staffer sniff it out and see if there's valuable information, but to take that on himself in a face-to-face, in particular when you involve senior campaign people like Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner, was an obvious misstep, and that's putting it mildly. I don't think he really understood that, and that is clear in listening to him tonight.
Now, you would think Manafort would have, given all of his experience. And one last question about the interview. Was there any follow-up? Did they get anything eventually? He doesn't say that he got anything from that meeting, but was there anything followed up as far as information along those lines after that meeting?
Yeah, he actually mentioned that there was a great deal of frustration on the part of that British tabloid publicist that this was really effectively not what they was told originally, Brett, that they would somehow have this information about the Clinton campaign. And so not only did they not get any in that meeting, they didn't get any to follow up afterwards, and that seemed to be a little frustrating for them. But again, it's a lesson learned, one that they're going to have to deal with now, perhaps for quite some time to come.
Yeah, Kevin Cork live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you.